councillors online. I hope you've been able to refresh yourself, as we have been able to do in here. The first item after lunch was a very interesting one, I think, and one that is important for all of us, the deliberative poll for VKT reduction program. And of course, all those councillors online today are making their own contribution to that, maybe save 20% of their work travel today by not coming in. And to be honest, it's certainly a trend that is continuing with you know, in our own councillor numbers, which I think is an entirely desirable one from my perspective. But we have Michael Roth along today as the lead transport advisor. Has been doing a lot of work on this, along with Dr. Anne Bardsley, and welcome Anne, who's the Director General for the Centre for Informed Futures at Auckland University, Koitu, and they have a presentation for us today. After which there's a few recommendations and I hope a number of questions, because there's some quite interesting potential in this deliberative poll. I think that will be getting conducted in due course. Over to you, Michael.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Chair. Now, the VKT reduction program, so vehicle kilometres travelled. The committee received information about that a couple of months ago. It is now underway. Procurement has started. Waka Kotahi has provided funding through to Auckland Transport and Council in order to progress the different elements of the project. One of the important community engagement elements is this deliberative poll. The idea behind the deliberative poll is it's a deliberative democracy process. So it takes a representative sample of the population and takes them through a very intensive process. It is something that was requested in the Mayor's letter of expectation to Auckland Transport. Because of that, and because of the transport emissions reduction pathway, we were aware of this process and aware of the work that Koitu had done previously with water care. So we investigated it, and when Waka Kotahi made some funding available, we progressed this initiative. So we're here today to explain the initiative to you. We will be doing it over the next few months, and then we will be coming back to you when it's finished, so that you're able to see what the community participants came up with as their recommended ways forward to deal with how our transport system will evolve over time, how we address the concerns around population growth, travel growth, and reducing emissions, reducing travel through the best means we can. I'll now hand over to Dr. Anne Bardsley to go through most of the process, and then I'll just come back in at the end.
Okay, go on. Go to the next one. Thank you. I'll just do a quick introduction of who we are and why we're involved, but that will also come up later, why our experience in deliberative processes. But as was introduced, I'm from Koitu, the Centre for Informed Futures, which is a nonpartisan think tank and research centre at the University of Auckland. We arose out of the office of the former Chief Science Advisor, Sir Peter Clackman. So we've been involved in this science technology related questions and evidence to policy, and lately in these more deliberative processes of involving the public in complex conversations and decision making. So I'm not getting these different buttons. There you go. Oops. Going too far. So we're here just to discuss, like I said, the deliberative approach to involving the public in answering the question that we framed at the moment around what changes we can make to ensure that everyone can get around Auckland efficiently, affordably, safely, and sustainably. That's in the context of pressures that we know we're under. we're not directly asking from the start in any leading way that this is about VKT reduction. They will come to that conclusion, we're pretty sure, based on the evidence that is presented. But the discussion is starting from a broader perspective about what the public thinks needs to change but to still ensure, with the pressures we have going forward, that we can create a transport system that is sustainable into the future. So just this methodology arises out of the kind of well-known public consultation problem, where we're aware that citizens are generally uninformed about really complex policy issues, and that conventional surveys and other methods of consultation usually surface only the top impressions of the public that are also subject to what social scientists call rational ignorance. They don't have a lot of reason to get too down into the detail of one decision over another, and they choose based on their own small experience or top of mind opinions, which we know can be unstable. So there's a lot of movement around deliberative processes in public engagement. The workshop parts of those deliberative processes are sometimes called mini publics. Sometimes it's as big as a citizens' assembly, which I'll mention in a little bit, around what we did with water care last year. But these are facilitated group discussions that provide an opportunity for essentially for social learning in microcosm. And they involve, that, as Michael said, a group of people that's descriptively representative of the community or the population, interacting in a way that often leads them to new understanding and insights. And that's because the participants do encounter a wide range of views that they're not necessarily having presented to them. And they're actually prompted through facilitation to explore their own views and ask why, or to consider why others might have different views. So it encourages the group to learn and move towards more consensus-based decision-making that could be supported by the general public. So just a couple of examples of what we've done recently. As was mentioned, we did a full citizens assembly partnering with water care last year. That involved the question there was the future source of water for Auckland, given that we know under climate change pressures and population growth that by the mid-2040s we would need a significant new source of water, and given that the agreement not to take further higher amounts of water from the Waikato going forward. So that involved a randomly selected representative group of Aucklanders. We do a stratified random selection, essentially a civic lottery process. So send out a large number of invitations, ask people to express their interest in participating, and from that group, from which we've collected demographics, we then use a sortition algorithm that creates a mini public that looks like the population of Auckland. So we had 40 citizens. In the end, we had 37 go through the whole process. And that particular one, they were empowered to make recommendations to water care after learning. That was a 2-month-long process with 4 full Saturdays and a few online sessions. They got to call their own experts, or they got to request certain types of experts to answer questions that they had come up. And so we did that in online sessions that included international experts. And they did make a recommendation to water care, which they are now pursuing. And another smaller one that is related to this particular exercise we're doing now was I did a pilot set of deliberative workshops with Te Manituaka, the Ministry of Transport, and that was around because they're preparing for a big consultation on the future of the revenue system next year and wanted to trial these processes first. So we did a 2-stage process. We wanted to using an online conversation tool called Polis, which we are interested in using also in this process that we're about to discuss, and for many public workshops across the country, asking the question, who should pay for what? So it addressed the question of what does the public want to see in the future of the transport system, and what did they think was a fair way to pay for it, looking at things like user pays models, and I'm trying and getting them to really understand what that meant. So those were just a couple of examples of our recent experience, but the method we have decided to use for the VKT reduction program is called deliberative polling, which is a method that's been around for a number of decades, developed by James Fishkin at Stanford University. And it involves, again, a stratified random sample of the population that is asked to take a poll, so a survey on the issue at hand, and then they go through a learning process similar to what I've described that we did for water care, only usually shorter. And then at the end they take the poll again, and it measures differences and how opinions have changed through that learning process. So the benefits of a deliberative poll is, some of them are similar to other deliberative processes that allows a representative group to weigh competing arguments on their merits. It can address those value-laden questions of policy choice that pose trade-offs on issues that people actually care about. And for a deliberative poll, that deliberation time can be shorter because the group is not tasked with writing their own recommendations, which usually for a full citizens assembly they are. So this one, the results will again be a survey, but it will represent the opinions of an informed public who've had a chance to really learn about the topic at hand. So it does avoid some of the social pressure, potential groupthink that can happen sometimes in assemblies if it's not facilitated. Strongly against that, but because the polling afterwards is again anonymous, people can have spoken to people in the room and can see what the general consensus might be, but they can then vote anonymously. I have quotes around that because we will be able to link back to demographics to be able to analyze which groups were in favor of which kind of interventions. So the process that we're proposing to use in this case for the VKT reduction program is essentially a short form deliberative process that will involve a broadly representative group of 100 Aucklanders selected through that randomized civic lottery process. So we're suggesting to put out more than 30,000 invitations to which will be, and we have to do it, it will be a randomized process, although there will be some open call aspect of this. There's always going to be an element of self-selection of people who decide they want to participate, but that's mediated or mitigated by the sortition process that gives you a random sample. And we've selected a larger number than you usually will have for these processes because it's a poll and we want to have a little more statistical weight behind any changes that we see between the pre-poll and the after poll. I want to mention here that we're also grounding this into Tier 2 principles. It is a demographic representation of Auckland, but we are starting from the position of mana whenua engagement. And for example, in the water care process, we did heavily engage with the mana whenua Kaitiaki Forum. They presented a view in the room, and so there's that viewpoint is presented. It won't be because Maori will only be statistically represented in the spread of that group of 100 participants, but the mana whenua viewpoint will be presented as in one of those expert groups that will come forward over that. So the process is, so we'll do a baseline polling on the transport system and their understanding the preferences of VKT reduction strategies, and that will be that people don't have to have any knowledge, and we don't expect them to have any knowledge of the potential interventions. But that's what we'll poll them on before they go into 2 days of facilitated learning. And that's going to span over a 2-week period. We're modeling this over a short form of the Citizens Assembly process, which gives them a day of learning and discussion and question asking, and then we can bring in international experts online in a session in the middle, and then 2 weeks later the second session, which is continuing the deliberation, and then they take a poll again at the end. So this is all happening. Our dates, we're hoping to report before the end of September. These are the dates that we've suggested for this forum to occur, starting from the 31st of August on an evening online session. We're actually going to ask the people, the participants, to take the first poll during that last week in August, so that we have some of the baseline data for the first assembly date, which is on the 2nd of September. So that will be a full day in-person learning and information session, understanding the purpose, objectives, and essential information, and people getting to know each other. We lay ground rules down about how the discussions will occur, and this does take knowledgeable facilitation to ensure that all the voices in the room are heard. So we will have, as I said, an online session on the 7th of September, and that will be followed. So this will also be built into a little mini website where the information can be stored, and people can refer to it if they can't get to that online session, or if they want further information in the interim period. And the second day will be on the 16th of September, another full Saturday, which we call the deliberation day, and there'll be various activities, and still, a chance for more Q&A and fact checking, in-room voting, and then the anonymous polling before we wrap up the session. So the additional elements that we are suggesting in this project are to document the full process on film. We think it not only will increase the transparency and understanding of what the process was, and help in that question of legitimacy in that whatever comes out of that. And we also have suggested to follow up and broaden the conversation using the Polis platform, which can extend the participation to the wider public. So the poll statements for that would be derived from the deliberative poll that we have used in the forum process. So we would hope that we can get a large enough participant pool in the Polis, and I'm happy to describe that process, because probably most people won't necessarily have heard of that platform, but it's very innovative, and I think it's a platform to allow visualization and understanding of consensus and differences from a large groups. And if we are suggesting, if the pool is large enough, from that we can, because that will be an open process of people wanting to participate in the conversation via Polis. But if it's a large enough pool, we can also use that sortition algorithm and analyze the conversation and the opinion groups from a representative sample. So I think that's the last of my bits.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, I think it's also important to remember that Council is dealing with its tertiary responsibilities in this process. Through the VKT reduction program, we are developing a Maori engagement plan, and that will assist with the process that Anne already described. And our Maori engagement advisor, Maru, will be involved in all aspects of the delivery of this deliberative poll. So we're advancing that. This process is a very intensive process. As you've heard, we're actually asking a lot of the participants. It's 2 full days, it's 2 evenings, and it's additional learning as well. That's why it's important for this process that they understand that Council does take this seriously. And that's why we're requesting with the recommendations that Councillor Watson or a delegated representative come along to the first day of learning and welcome the group to demonstrate to them that the council is involved and is very interested in finding out what the group comes up with. And also at the end of the process, the outcomes that are derived from that will come back to the Transport and Infrastructure Committee at a future meeting, so that everyone here has the ability to hear what all the outcomes are and to consider them and to work out then how we take them forward, and also to refer them to AT board, because obviously Auckland Transport is involved with this as well. They're assisting in the delivery and and working up the whole project. So that's the presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Michael and Dr. Barsley. I think, two really interesting concepts here, both in terms of deliberative polling and the VKT. We're almost getting two for the price of one, I think, to see how this goes. Often consultation and public feedback is a concern of councillors as to how representative, how worthwhile, etc. It's everything. So this is a really good opportunity to see what comes out of here. And as it turns out, with a program that's really important, and that people on the ground might actually have some real ideas that we can implement. So I see it, really worthwhile in both counts. Now there are some questions that I noticed Councillor Foley was having trouble with her microphone. I don't know if that's been addressed or not. Councillor Foley? Okay, so I'll just read it out. Could you just scroll it down a bit, Nathan, so I can see what the question that Councillor Foley has posed as it's in the chat bar there. And of course, Councillor Foley brings no small amount of academic background herself, as it turns out, but what she asked is, how will you ensure you have our diverse communities represented, especially those for whom an EOI type of selection process does not work? How will you capture the voices of those who tend not to engage with council and/or in these processes?
It's an excellent question, and we work hard at recruitment. We're already starting on that. The strategy, is that we send out quite a few invitations. Some of them are by email using databases to keep costs down, but we also skew mail drops, and we have an address. We've got randomized addresses, and we specifically target areas where we expect low participation. Thus far, we have not had a problem with forming a group that represents all demographics. You do have to, we get about a 3 to 5% return rate on when you're asking these people to participate for this length of time. We do compensate them. The participants will be paid for their time, and for anyone who demonstrates a need, we will cover the childcare and transport costs. We're proposing to do this down in the Maritime Room, somewhere where it is easy to get to in a central location by transport, but we understand that people that on lower incomes will need to be supported additionally. But that's part of the, it might be motivating for them that either they're interested in the question itself, or this is something quite different that they're being asked to, that you could be selected to participate in, and we will compensate you for your time. Most people who have done this and come through the processes say they would have done it without being paid to do it, even people who might actually quite benefit from that payment. So people do enjoy these processes. We know it's difficult to do, but that's why we do such a large initial call out, and we try specifically to get into neighborhoods where people don't normally participate in these processes at all.
And the quick follow-up question Councillor Foley had was, are you engaging with the advisory panels and local boards to help you reach a wide demographic and our diverse communities, also our communities of diverse abilities.
We have made a decision not to go through the advisory boards or local boards because of the very large civic lottery process that Koitu will run. That ensures the representative sample, and it also ensures that all demographics are covered, all income segments, all geographic areas. It is very important in this process for it to be representative, and the people who are on advisory groups and local boards are there because they're interested in certain things. So they're not the first choice when you want a representative sample. We certainly will take the outcomes and socialise them with those groups, but they're not the target groups for participants in this process.
Okay, we have a number of questions from people in the room and online. Councillors Walker, Baker, Dalton and Lee. Councillor Walker.
Sure. So I've just got a question around how you get on with what a number of people would suggest imminent technological changes that impact dramatically on transport. I'm talking about, in no particular order, the electrification of everything, the near certainty, I would suggest, of full self-drives, and an economic model that's upended because a car might be used 1/20th of the time, so that it impacts on ownership. All of those things together dramatically reduce the cost of vehicle kilometres travelled, and it effectively means that you've got an Uber-like service, but you know at quantum leaps above what we've even seen now, and the deployment of that within a very short-term time frame, likely. So, how do you get around those sorts of changes that are being driven by investments of the order of huge sums of money that are akin to, you know, the advent of cell phones?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. We go through quite a process to inform the people, and that's why there's so much value in this kind of process. We are currently putting together an information booklet that will have a lot of this information about, well, what is the status of the current transport system, the different elements of it, the costs of it, what other things we're expecting to see in the future. All the people who attend the session, they will have their own views. They'll have different experiences and different views on what will happen in the future. And there will be a number of experts who present to the group. Those experts, we will make sure that the experts cover issues like electrification, autonomous travel, new business models, sharing systems and the like. And also the participants have an opportunity not just to listen, but to ask. And that is why there's an evening session organised in between the 2 full days, so that we can collate all the questions and find some appropriate experts who can then answer those questions to the best of their ability. So we want to provide all that information, let people consider what may evolve.
Good answer. Councillor Baker.
Yeah, thanks, John. So just my question is following on from Councillor Foley, really, and it's just in terms of really how we define diversity, and you know, how we will. Can you give me some comfort that actually the diversity of that we're seeking in this reasonably small group of people will cover off, you know, actually all of Auckland's communities, and I mean, you know, the communities that are in the urban rural fringe, the small communities, rural communities that are close enough, but you know, just out of the urban area, and then those communities and people who have no option to drive cars, you know, in the further afield rural areas. How are we going to actually have guarantees that those people will be represented, And then how are you, because it's quite interesting that you're asking them to come into town, into the city centre for 2 days, and are sort of willing to remunerate them for that. But how are you going to actually attract the people that might live an hour and a half from the city centre, who have as much right to be heard and as part of this process? How are we going to deal with that? Because that concerns me, that we just have a pool of people that actually is fairly similar. And so you're not actually getting the diversity that we seek, and it's not just about ethnic diversity and things like that. So just some clarity on that, please.
I'll let you go to start with. Again, a good question. It's so we call it a civic lottery process, but what we end up with, as Anne mentioned, is 30,000 emails go out plus several thousand letterbox drops. From that, hopefully 1,000 or possibly 2,000 or 3,000 people will demonstrate some interest. When they demonstrate interest, they have to provide information for us. And that's around where they live, their household income, their age, gender, and so forth. And although it's called a civic lottery, it's not a random selection from that. From those people who get back to us, and that's why we're chasing 1,000 or 2,000, from that we pick 100 that are representative, and we will be doing that across age groups to make sure we've got all age groups properly represented, from 18 to very old, across household income levels, across geography. So we will be making sure there are people from Rodney and Franklin Ward, and gender, obviously. So the group will be very well defined to be representative of the entire population of Auckland, plus the elements that Anne mentioned around paying for childcare, paying for transport if that's requested by some. That enables people to make that decision, even if they have a long drive in, or if they have to catch a train and so forth, to make that decision. So we're not excluding them.
I'll just add to that. We do, if we expect that it might be difficult to reach some areas, as I said earlier, and that can include, we can specifically target those fringe suburbs or farther out places for the mail drops, or even in well, probably not in the email, that's going to be just generalized. So it would be for the mail portion of that. So they have the chance to express their interest in being selected, and some of that we can do our sortition a number of times and look at what the spread is on geographically. If we say that's not good enough, then we can run the program again until we get a sample that fits those. But it is important to define what those both geographic and demographic boxes that we want to fill are. What's important, we know that ability or disability is an important one, obviously, for transport. So that is one of the questions that we will be asking if they have a major. This is all based also on, we have to say, on census data for Auckland. So we based the proportions based on the 2018 census, which we know isn't great. We'd love to have the more recent one, but we will be working off percentages from the census and the questions that in the way they're asked in the census, so that we get as close as we can to that kind of representation.
Councillor Dalton.
Sorry, John, couldn't find my mute button. Mine's actually a comment. Did you want me to wait?
We'll maybe take the comments at the end.
Yep.
Andrew, if you don't mind.
No problem.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Lee.
Yes, I just came in a bit late, but just a couple of questions. First of all, what is the outcome we're looking for here, and who is paying for it?
So Waka Kotahi paying for this through the VKT reduction program. Auckland Transport and Council put in a joint submission which they funded. So it's Waka Kotahi money. Our outcomes are, we are providing a report in September that contributes toward the VKT reduction program that's currently underway, again by Auckland Transport and ourselves. But this also will provide additional information through the extension items that Anne mentioned with the documentary and the POLIS process, and should be useful to inform any future strategic direction by providing a very extensive and rich view of the community desires around the future of transport.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment now, or should I wait?
If you wouldn't mind just waiting, Councillor Lee, we'll come back to
Sure.
you and Councillor Dalton at the end. Next one up, Councillor Ferry.
Thanks. Just a quick question. Completely understand the point you've made about the advisory panels and the local boards. This is quite a different process. However, I think it would be really useful for you to keep them in the loop about this project. And do you have any plans to not so much include them in the polling, the deliberative polling stuff, but actually to keep them informed about it, because I think that both local boards and the advisory panels will be really interested in seeing how this unfolds. Thank you.
Very good question. Again, we have developed this very quickly. The procurement process is actually still underway. It's not been finalised, so it's been very much a rush to get it through as quickly as possible to meet the deadlines of the Waka Kotahi funding that's come through. But you raise a very good point. We need to engage with local boards, make them aware of this, and certainly present the outcomes to them as well. So I'll undertake to do that.
Councillor Hills.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Watson, and this is great. Thank you so much, and clearly in line with our unanimously supported Te Taraki a Tāwhiri. But just wanting to understand exactly how it will, how people will understand what VKT is. Will there be, the assumption is, oh, we'll jump on bikes every, 7 days a week or whatever. But, my understanding of my family who farming and rurally, their version of reducing VKT is only going to the shops once a week or a fortnight, planning ahead, whereas maybe someone in urban areas might go to the shops every day because it's easy. And will there be various focus on, say, reducing it where possible, so once or twice a week as opposed to every day, and also if someone would reduce their VKT if they had options to, rather than what sometimes the system expects is that you can do it even if you don't have access to walking, cycling, public transport.
Well, we're not prescribing anything at the start. All of those options, all of the interventions will be discussed. And we're not even introducing this as we're coming here to tell you to figure out how we drive less, even though underneath this is where the funding is, and that's the program that we're trying to inform. We introduce this about what we value, what the public values about the transport system, what they want to see, and talk about the issues that we currently face, and let them understand that. They will come to the conclusion, because we already know that every expert is going to tell us that we need to reduce VKT as part of the emissions reduction. And but you've got to bring the public along that journey, so we're not directing them in any particular way, and all of those things. And we're not also not in the poll asking them to come up with one solution either. It's how they would rank those and how they fit and understand them. So
okay. So my understanding is you will let them draw out those different options as opposed to coming to them and saying, "Would you reduce your VK?" Like, I mean, I get that, but I just would hate for the people not to have the broad understanding of changes they might make that aren't just what maybe they get through the media.
I mean, through the information booklet and through the experts that we'll be presenting, we will be making sure that the participants are aware of all the different opportunities, both behaviour changes and systemic changes. And they also have an opportunity to ask questions of different experts. It's important in this process that that we do not try to lead them down any particular path, that we remain objective and allow the participants to come to their own conclusions on what makes most sense. But they certainly will be given the best understanding that ourselves, Auckland Transport, Waka Kotahi have, as well as some international experts that will be invited to participate in the process.
Okay, Councillor Darby.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Anne. This is good to see you. I think we discussed this 3 years ago, Anne. And thanks for Koi too, Centre for Informed Futures, for pursuing this work. And I can see it reflected in the future of local government recommendations now too. And Michael for picking it up. Michael, I've often batted to make sure that Auckland Transport, Operations and Transport Strategy Unit, I'm getting a sense that they're involved with this. You have referred, but I just want to make sure that you're joined at the hip with Auckland Transport on this, and you've been nominated as the lead on it. It's just that's the case.
Yes, we are working collaboratively with Auckland Transport, both their climate change and sustainability team and their voice of customer insights team are involved in our work, because it will have overlap as well. We're doing polling of people. We want to compare that to the customer insights that Auckland Transport is drawing through their own surveying processes, so they can learn from us, we can learn from them. They're definitely involved in the process, and they will be also involved on the day. Some of the expertise that we will provide to the participants will be from Auckland Transport, because they have more people with expertise in the different areas, covering everything from walking, cycling, public transport, roads, traffic systems, future transport issues, and the like. We're very much working together.
Fantastic, thanks. And you've spent a lot of time studying participatory processes around the world that have been successful, and probably some that maybe haven't worked. And there's been a lot of refinement in this area. So can you just give us a brief account of what is the product of a participatory process compared with maybe a telling process, an informing process that is in the guise of so-called we're asking for your feedback, but we've actually shaped it already. How does a community respond to a project or a program that's gone through a participatory process compared with an informing process or a deadening statutory consultative process? I'm not talking about how they respond to the process itself. How does that community respond when that project or program is then delivered? Do they have a far greater sense of ownership and enjoyment and recognition of it, or that's the line of my interest?
Yeah, I mean, that is something that we have been studying and looking at internationally, and how these processes work and how they affect communities. Yes, they do need to be quite transparent, and people need to know that they're happening, and that these decisions have been made by groups that they can see look like them. And I can give you the example of Ireland. We recently had a webinar with the head of the Electoral Commission from Ireland, who was the one who organized the first citizens' assembly there, which is quite famous. It changed the constitutional abortion laws in Ireland, in a very conservative country. And those processes gained momentum, so that now people, they have to, their return rate from an expression of interest is very, very high, about 14%, as opposed to normally it's about 3 to 5%, because people can see the value in the processes themselves, and they agree with. If an assembly has come to a certain decision, that tends to be accepted by the public, and they can engage in that. These processes can be used on all scales, though. Ireland is a national assembly program. So the Prime Minister sends out the letters of invitation, come from the Prime Minister, signed by the Prime Minister. We're not quite at that level that we're doing here yet. We're really at the beginning of trying to use these processes here, and they're not very well known, which is why we did want to document this process. But we've had a lot of interest, and they can be done on small scales in communities as well.
Well, hopefully we're going to be engaging you for further participatory process. Just one tweak possibly to the recommendations, and I'm happy to move and support you welcoming the participants in the first deliberative poll meeting, or if we can call it a meeting. I think there's probably another word to describe it, isn't there? but I'm just wondering, while we're in the sea, we're asking for it to be presented here. I'd probably like to see it that we're recommending it be presented to the Auckland Transport Board as well, not just for their information, because it's something quite different to the information just coming through in a package and actually having Dr. Bardsley and Michael Roth actually present it to the Auckland Transport Board. Is it possible, I'm not sure whether there's a willingness to recommend, because we can't tell the board to receive a presentation, Barry, maybe with your guidance, could we tweak the words along the lines of, recommending it be presented to the Auckland Transport Board? Since they're our equal governance partner. You've got two partners here. Well, I've got three with Waka. To present to the board. Yeah, no, I don't see anything too objectionable in that. So we'll make that addition. We've still got a couple of questions, Councillor Walker.
Just picking up on your comment that there isn't any single answer. So is it conceivable that there's a sort of a scenario-based approach that people would come up with something based on various scenarios, and they would accept that there are different scenarios out there, and I guess what goes to that is how people determine things is in large part going to be based around their lived experience and also their capacity to take information on, particularly around futures-based thinking, because I'm not sure what time frame you're looking at in terms of how far you're projecting out. So just toss that in.
Their lived experience is a very important issue. That's why it's a representative process, so we get that broad spectrum. And the poll process is essentially they do the survey at the start and again at the end. We assess the differences in their survey responses. So effectively, they're telling us what they support and don't support, or what they view as important or ranking on the surveys that we provide. So that gives us scenarios. It also gives us the ability to identify where there are different groups that coalesce around supporting certain things and other groups that coalesce around supporting other solutions, and looking at the differences in those groups, whether they're demographic or geographic differences and the like. So we learn a lot of that through the surveys. And of course, to supplement the lived experience, we provide them a lot of information as well as answers to any questions that does educate the people a lot.
I'll comment a little more on that whole scenarios question. I mean, with this is a pretty short process, so we can't get too far into them developing scenarios and discussing those in any kind of detail. In a longer process, you could do that, and the assembly could come up with their own recommendations, which might be different. This is a more straightforward way of, I mean, we will essentially develop a scenario from the analysis that comes out of that changed attitudes.
Okay, thank you. So we'll just be putting up the recommendations at a minute before we go to Councillor Dalton and Councillor Lee, who have expressed an interest in talking to it. Just before they do that, the final question from myself, I'd imagine there'd be quite a lot of councillors who are interested in the information that is given to the group. And perhaps a little explanation or the kind of material that they're really getting as a whole. Now, is that, I'm assuming that would be at the least would be made available in the presentation back to us. Is there any merit or in that being made available to people in advance of it, but certainly signalling the desire of people just to see what's happened here, what's gone out, and the way it's been done, so that we inform ourselves as well at the same time.
We can make the whole information booklet available to all the councillors in addition to any presentations we do afterwards.
Okay, that'll be great. Thank you for that. Okay, so the recommendations are up there with the addition that that we basically, that presentation go to the Auckland Transport Board too for their information. I think that's that's desirable in this instance. So we have Councillor Dalton to speak to the recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. Look, and thank you, Michael. And this is, I just really wanted to support this wholeheartedly. It has been a long time coming that council step into the space. We did see Watercare do it so well in their in their deliberative democracy work that they did. So John, I think this is great leadership by you and your committee to be embracing this, because we need to really get to the people and hear from our people in a meaningful way, so they really understand the issues and we get a good gauge on how they feel about, in this case, VKT. It's the only way that we can move forward in the direction that we probably need to go, because what we see in our normal consultations, the same demographics coming back through those, and we're not hitting all of the people out there that we need to reach. So really supportive, would absolutely love to be part of this at some point in the future if there's more. So Michael, I'm really pleased that you picked this up and ran with it. So thank you, John.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My concern about deliberative polls is that they're not too far from managed polls, and the real concern is that you could, in having a managed or deliberative poll or whatever, the outcome that the power structure wants, rather than an outcome that is not what the power structure wants. And if you do have an outcome that is suitable, it may not really reflect the reality out in the community. That's my concern. I was concerned to read yesterday in our material on the long-term plan, the council acknowledging that there has been a decline in confidence and trust in local government. And that appears to coincide with the more corporate way of assessing public opinion. I don't know how much this program will cost, but that is the concern, that there is an aspect. Auckland, New Zealand is something of a village. I've been involved in these sorts of processes before, and the outcome always turns out the way the people organising it and paying for it, indeed, and paying quite a lot, I'd imagine, it always turns out the way they want. So that is the concern I have in these processes. In regard to the issue itself, vehicle kilometres travelled reduction, this seems to totally ignore the fact that more and more significant numbers of electric EVs are on our roads. The objective, and a well-meant objective, is to reduce carbon emissions. But again, the process has become everything, and the program has become everything without looking at consequences or unintended consequences, and indeed costs which are externalised onto the council and the community. So I'll just make those cautionary comments and about these sorts of corporate type democratic democratic processes, organised, deliberative, managed, even push polling. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say that this is another exciting development, and hopefully it will give, it is funded by Auckland Kotahi, but it will obviously help give us some advice and give Auckland Transport advice on the challenge we have ahead. We have already approved the direction that we will dramatically reduce VKT across our city and work towards that. And we know the transport agencies, the government, the Climate Commission, everyone is saying the same thing. Worldwide, businesses are looking at this. All businesses are having to report on how they're going to reduce emissions through their own businesses as of this year, I think. And this is the sort of work they will be interested in to help them. I've had contact from businesses asking if we do have some of this research for them, for their team. So we know that this is going to be important work to show what people think, but also hopefully broaden out those views. And why I mentioned before around VKT, not just meaning that everyone has to do everything on a bike for the rest of their life. This is broader than that. This is maybe reducing travel once a day, doing what I do because I have good bus services, as busing as much as possible, but still using the car when those options aren't available to me. And also when people don't have access to public transport, walking or cycling, it's about us ensuring we put that in, because whenever we do studies, people say they would do all these things if they had access to that infrastructure. So it is on us to provide that infrastructure in the places that it is needed, but also give people options or ideas of what to do until that is available for them, such as, going to the shops once a week, writing a list, or instead of going 5 or 6 times, they reduce congestion emissions and, obviously cost to the person as well. So I think there's a long list of things that people want to do. We know 80% of Aucklanders want us to do and the city to drastically reduce emissions, but they keep saying they want to know how. So if this can be one more cog in that system to help give us those leads, but also individuals potentially the ability to change behaviours, then that can only be a good thing. And on EVs, every country in the world is dramatically increasing the uptake of EVs, but they are also mostly, if we look across Asia and Europe, they are also reducing VKT quite dramatically. If you look around Europe and Asia, South Korea that I was in a couple of months ago, they're reducing car lanes, they're reducing where cars can be in parts of the city and opening up more space for walking, cycling, safety for schools and public transport, but also giving options for people who need to use cars for freight or for if they have disabilities to make sure they still have access and the road is prioritised for them. So I think this will be a good part of the research that we need to continue to make these decisions. Thank you.
Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Look, I don't get super excited about all the business of our committees, but I'm actually moderately excited about this. Moderately, there we go. That's about as much enthusiasm as you get out of me. But and look, we did talk about this a long time ago, and it's taken a while, but some of us haven't given up. And Councillor Dalton, thank you. But look, I some of us really do hang on to that representative democracy model. Like it's sacrosanct and it's perfect. We know it's not, but it doesn't need to. It doesn't mean that the representative model falls away to allow the participatory model to come forward. They can work together. In fact, the representative model becomes strengthened when you've got a participatory model underpinning it. In my eyes, so look, I'm really enthusiastic. There you go, enthusiastic about this whole new way of engaging with Aucklanders. This is just the very beginning. And we'll see more of it, like the Irish jurisdiction and many European countries are doing this now. And I'm firmly of the view, having been an elected member for some time, that we really do need to discover a whole new way of listening and learning from Aucklanders. I asked Anne a question about what are the outcomes at the end. I sort of know the answer. I know that in the jurisdictions where participatory models are used, the ownership of the program or the project is really strong. It's quite powerful. The communities that are affected view that outcome as themselves being the architects rather than the elected members or the management or the designers. They actually view themselves as having shaped, drawn that outcome. And that's really powerful. And that's how you get, in some ways, the whole of the council organisation to be, the whole reputation is strengthened because we allow Aucklanders to come to the fore and shape their city. Now, it might sound a little bit trite, but that's what's showing up in the jurisdictions where participatory models have been implemented for the last 10, 15 years. It is a very deliberative polls. They are structured, but I wouldn't say they are managed or manipulated. But in fact, it's the opposite. It's quite the opposite. In fact, you're using tools to make sure it is not managed. It's absolutely the opposite. But I hear that point from one of the councillors. I do stress that the days of deadening consultation, really, we should be seeing the back of it, because we know that that is the most managed and manipulated so-called engagement process that you can find. And we've been using it for decades. And I look forward, Anne, to an ongoing relationship with Koi too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I was really hoping I didn't have to follow Councillor Darby because that was really fantastic and the excitement's infectious, but I'm the black hat of this conversation, Chair. I'm sorry. Look, I've a bit of a bellyache, and I've talked to Watercare about this before when they did their Citizens Assembly. Look, on a fundamental level, I'm actually not a fan of Citizens Assemblies. I consider that representative democracy, in my opinion, actually is a great system, and it needs champions now more than ever. We shouldn't always uncritically accept attempts to chip away that system, which that kind of process is, in my opinion, nor should we take as gospel the implicit criticism that democratically elected politicians can't make the tough decisions that they are up to the job. I think that's a subtext of what we're saying when we put in those kind of systems. And so I do regard it with a lot of skepticism. And also, just to add, we have advisory panels, we have feedback structures. I mean, elected members are more accessible than ever. You can call us in the middle of the night, and people do. I think that representative democracy is a great system that we should be cherishing, and so I'm actually not a fan of that. I'm sorry, Councillor Darby. But despite that, look, in terms of the excitement, I do share it in a way because, you know, paradoxically, any advice that we get is good when we're talking about such a massive problem such as this. In terms of the reduction of vehicle kilometres travelled, I do need to point out that we're not just talking about carbon emissions, although that is, you know, the future of the planet. That's kind of a big deal. But we're also talking about busting congestion. We're also talking about democratising transport and allowing it to be available to people that live further away, that have less money in their pocket. So those are the kind of things that we're talking about. It's not just carbon, right? So, you know, I will, despite my misgivings, vote it through, and I look forward to the advice in any case. So thank you very much for all your work. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And if I might be so bold, I might just make a couple of brief comments myself, seeing as I have seconded these resolutions. And I guess the first one is to acknowledge, you know, really the observations of the councillors in this item, both for and against, you know, and I guess the proof of the pudding is going to be in the end result, and that's what I'm certainly interested in seeing, actually what comes out of that. I've seen what's come out of, you know, our kind of endless round of annual plans and long-term plans, and I don't think I'm alone in thinking that kind of really falls a bit short of the mark when it's all said and done. So this is a new way of looking at engaging with our public, and I say that in the context of what's in our paper here in terms of, you know, the letter of expectation that we have passed ourselves to AT and endeavouring to understand and respond to what matters most to Aucklanders. So, you know, I really want to hear that and hear it in a way that goes beyond the, you know, the pretty cursory, superficial response that we often get, that this process seems to offer. As far as the VKT program goes, I'm particularly interested in how that pans out, and again in the context of our paper where we've signalled that we really want to look at how we better manage the infrastructure assets we already have. So I'm pretty keen to see what the public see as being there already that we could be using to reduce our VKTs rather than waiting, as we seem to, on the nirvana when suddenly everything's there and suddenly someone presses a button and all our targets are met. I want to see all the things that I see, and as a kind of ordinary member of the public, that I think could go to reducing VKTs. We hear a lot about walking and cycling links. There's not too many places in Auckland where you can't walk if you really want to. Most places there's usually, except out in Hobsonville and Whenuapai and Herald Island, where there's a couple of footpaths on both sides of the roads. In other countries, those footpaths are used as dual pedestrian and cycleways quite successfully with the appropriate behaviour modification. And I rather suspect that there's people out in our public who hopefully through this process will come up with some very practical suggestions that get us going on this now and personalise it. One of the best way to personalise things is to get young people involved. And I'm assuming the demographic doesn't go out to school-age children, but if you want to get people engaged and putting targets and bringing the family on board, often it's young people that can ask, and they've often got some quite good ideas. So I'm looking forward to the results. I hope that the assurance that all the information is going to be made available so people can see what's happened, and I'm certainly looking forward to what comes back to us at the end. So thank you for everyone today and for our presenters. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Okay. Boy, this stage in the afternoon where things start to drag a bit, Barry. You're holding up quite well there, Barry.